Welcome to the Hollow Files, where the forgotten, the cursed, and the unspeakable are brought back into the light. Tonight, we open another case from the shadows. The year was 1977, and the sleepy town of Millfield, Vermont was a picture of serene Americana. Tucked between verdant mountains and deep ancient forests, this community was a quiet anachronism, untouched by the chaotic pulse of the outside world. The flamboyant excesses of disco and the political unrest of the era were but distant echoes, unable to penetrate the tranquil harmony of this rural haven. As autumn's chill began to seep into the air, the leaves of the surrounding hillsides blazed in a final brilliant spectacle of orange and crimson, a beautiful yet deceptive tableau. It was against this backdrop of natural splendor that a shadow began to fall, cast by the arrival of the Bennett family. They took residence in an imposing Victorian house at 47 Oakwood Lane in early September. The residence, a relic from 1887, had stood abandoned for 7 years following the peaceful death of its last owner, a lonely widow named Margaret Holloway. Local gossip painted Margaret as a reclusive eccentric, prone to murmuring about strange apparitions and unseen visitors in her final years. Most dismissed her claims as the rambling of a fragile mind, a lonely woman succumbing to age. But these whispers, like the house itself, would soon prove to hold a deeper truth. On moving day, the long dormant silence of the property was shattered by the grinding of tires on the gravel driveway as the family's station wagon and a hired moving van arrived. The house itself seemed to awaken, looming over them with a somber majesty. 3 stories of faded glory were crowned by a distinctive turret room on the right side. Its wraparound porch, adorned with peeling gingerbread trim, held a quiet air of decay. The tall windows, like watchful eyes, mirrored the afternoon light, giving the impression of a slumbering entity stirring to life. "It has character," Eleanor murmured, her hand finding her husband's, her gaze sweeping over their new home. Robert nodded in agreement, though a flicker of uncertainty, a momentary apprehension crossed his face before he quickly suppressed it. Their children's reactions were predictable. The eldest, Michael, concealed his curiosity behind the practiced, casual indifference of a 17-year-old, offering only a dismissive shrug. Sarah, 15, observant and quiet, immediately began composing potential photographs in her mind's eye. The youngest, Timothy, raced through the empty rooms, his excited shouts echoing through spaces that had known only silence for nearly a decade. "Can I have the tower room?" Tim asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "The turret," Robert corrected gently, "and I think that might be better as your mother's studio. The light would be perfect for her painting." Eleanor smiled, her mind already sketching out canvases arranged beneath the curved windows, bathed in the natural light that poured in from all angles. "Perhaps you can visit me there when I'm working. It can be our special place." On the surface, the Bennett family seemed the very picture of American domesticity. Robert Bennett, a distinguished 42-year-old psychiatrist, was a recognized authority on sleep disorders and the enigmatic phenomenon of shared dreams. His academic authority was reinforced by his thick-rimmed glasses and neatly trimmed beard, while his warm, patient demeanor made him approachable to all who knew him. He had maintained a successful private practice in Boston while teaching at a prestigious medical school. His research on how shared traumas can surface in recurring dream patterns across family units had garnered him widespread acclaim in psychiatric circles. His wife, Eleanor, 39, was an acclaimed artist whose haunting oil paintings often depicted surreal dreamscapes. Her long auburn hair, typically styled in a loose braid, and her flowing bohemian attire stood in stark contrast to the conservative fashions of rural Vermont. She possessed a quiet creativity and a deep spiritual sensitivity. Her work had been featured in several prominent Boston galleries, praised for its emotional depth and technical skill. Art critics frequently commented on her ability to capture the liminal space between states of consciousness, blurring the lines between the tangible world and the realm of dreams.
Their 3 children completed the family. Michael, a bright 17-year-old with literary aspirations, wrote short stories with a maturity that belied his age, often exploring complex themes of identity and perception. Sarah, a quiet 15-year-old girl, was a skilled photographer who preferred to observe the world through her camera lens, capturing subtle moments that others might miss. And Timothy, the youngest, possessed a boundless imagination and an uncanny intuition, often seemingly inhabiting a world of his own, populated by elaborate fantasies and imaginary friends.
The Bennett's relocation was prompted by Robert's acceptance of a prestigious position at Millfield State University's psychology department. The move promised a more serene environment for his family, a fresh start away from the vague, unsettling occurrences that Robert had attributed to the high stress of city life in Boston. The strange events that had driven the family from the city were a topic they rarely discussed. It had begun with Eleanor's art. Her compositions, once balanced and luminous, became chaotic and dark, filled with shadowy figures lurking at the edges of her canvases. When asked about this shift, Eleanor insisted she was merely exploring new artistic techniques, but Robert noticed her growing unease and the way she would stare at her work as if seeing something that troubled her profoundly. Then came Michael's night terrors, violent episodes where the teenager would wake up screaming about shadows at the foot of his bed. Sarah developed an irrational fear of mirrors, covering her bedroom mirror with a scarf and meticulously avoiding her reflection. Timothy began speaking of a whispering man who would visit his room at night, sharing secrets he could never quite remember in the morning. Robert, a man of science, sought rational explanations. He arranged sleep studies for Michael and therapy for Sarah. He gently questioned Timothy about his imaginary friend, yet clinical assessments revealed no underlying medical or psychological issues. He concluded that the family's mental well-being was likely suffering under the strain of urban noise, pollution, and the general stress of their cramped city life. The opportunity at Millfield State University presented itself as the perfect solution, a chance to start anew in a place where the air was clean, the nights were quiet, and nature's beauty might heal the unnamed anxiety that had taken root in his family. Sometimes a change of environment is the best medicine, he had told Eleanor as they considered the move. The children could use more space, more nature, and think of what the Vermont landscapes could do for your painting. Eleanor had agreed, though with a measure of reservation. Do you really think it's just the city, Robert? Sometimes I wonder if we're bringing something with us, something inside us. All the more reason to go, Robert had replied. If there is something psychological affecting us, a new setting might help break the pattern. As they were leaving Boston, Timothy had asked a question that would later seem chillingly prophetic. Will the whispering man know where to find us in Vermont? Robert had assured him that imaginary friends stayed behind when you moved, like outgrown toys. He could not have known how wrong he would be. The Bennetts settled quickly into their new lives. Robert immersed himself in his new role at the university. Eleanor established a studio in the spacious attic, and the children enrolled in their respective schools. For the first few weeks, everything seemed idyllic. The neighbors were welcoming, the autumn air was invigorating, and the old house, despite its age, was a comfortable refuge. The people of Millfield initially regarded the newcomers with the polite curiosity typical of a small town. The Bennetts, a sophisticated family from the city, with their academic and artistic backgrounds, were a novelty. Robert, in his tweed jackets and thoughtful demeanor, fit the archetype of a university professor perfectly. Eleanor's bohemian style, though it raised some eyebrows at the local grocery store, was quickly forgiven by her warm smile and genuine interest in the town's history. Their first dinner party, a small gathering of Robert's university colleagues, was a success.
Eleanor's Coq au vin was a hit, and Robert's jazz records provided a sophisticated backdrop for conversations about psychology, art, and literature. If anyone noticed the slight tension in Eleanor's smile when the topic of dreams came up, or the way Robert's hand tightened around his wine glass when a colleague mentioned the house's history, they likely dismissed it as the natural anxiety of new homeowners eager to make a good impression. Michael found his niche in the high school's literary magazine, his short stories earning praise from his English teacher. Sarah joined the photography club, though she remained solitary, preferring to wander the school grounds during lunch, capturing images of shadows cast by the old oak trees. Timothy, with his infectious laughter and outgoing nature, quickly became a favorite among his classmates and teachers. The house at 47 Oakwood Lane, which had been silent for so long, came to life with the sounds of a family. The late-night clacking of Robert's typewriter, the swish of Eleanor's paintbrushes in the attic, and Michael's rock music drifting from his closed bedroom door. The bubbling chemicals in Sarah's converted dark room, and the racing of Timothy's toy cars across the hardwood floors. The groans and creaks of the old structure became part of the house's character, a comforting rather than a concerning sound. Each morning, Eleanor would brew coffee and the percolator, its gentle burbling accompanied by the local radio station. Robert would join her, reviewing his lecture notes as he adjusted his tie. The children would descend the stairs in a predictable sequence. Timothy first, full of an 8-year-old's boundless energy, followed by a quiet and still half-asleep Sarah, and finally Michael, perpetually running late, grabbing a piece of toast on his way out the door. It was a rhythm of domestic life that promised stability and peace. The Bennetts began to believe the shadows of Boston were truly behind them, dispelled by Vermont's clean mountain air and the solid walls of their new home. Then came October 7th. That night, every member of the Bennett family shared the exact same nightmare. They each stood in a vast, dark forest clearing, bathed in the sinister glow of a blood-red moon. In the center of the clearing, a tall, twisted tree stood with bare branches that clawed at the crimson sky like skeletal fingers. From those branches, 5 empty nooses swayed gently in a wind that carried unintelligible, yet somehow familiar, whispers. The dream had a visceral quality that set it apart from a typical nightmare, a tangible reality that lingered after they woke. The rough texture of the bark against their fingertips, the earthy scent of damp leaves mingled with something metallic, the frigid air on their skin, and the distant sound of something rustling in the undergrowth. These details were so vivid they felt more like remembered events than products of a sleeping mind. For Robert, the dream was particularly unnerving. He was not merely an observer. He felt an irresistible pull towards the tree, his feet moving on their own across the soft forest floor. He reached out, his hand nearly touching one of the rough hemp nooses before he jolted awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. Eleanor experienced the dream from the edge of the clearing, watching as shadowy figures moved towards the tree. Their faces were obscured, but their silhouettes felt strangely familiar, triggering a primal maternal urge to run and intervene. But in the dream, she was frozen, paralyzed, and unable to move or cry out. Michael's dream included a detail the others missed, a sound like distant singing, a melody he couldn't quite grasp, but that seemed to emanate from the tree itself. The song had filled him with a profound sense of sadness and inevitability, and he woke with tears streaming down his face. Sarah, with her photographer's eye, noticed how the fallen leaves formed concentric circles around the tree
and how the moonlight created geometric, intentional-looking shadows. She saw the unnatural spiral of the tree's bark and the strange symbols carved into its trunk. And Timothy, with a child's directness, described the nooses as waiting for us, a simple observation that would later prove to be the most chilling of all. The following morning, the family gathered at the breakfast table, each unusually quiet and subdued. Timothy was the first to speak, describing the forest and the tree with childlike simplicity. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Michael and Sarah exchanged a look of disbelief. Robert, ever the scientist, attempted to dismiss the coincidence as a shared anxiety about their new environment. But when the same nightmare returned the next night and the night after that, Robert began a journal, meticulously documenting their experiences. Each family member's account remained perfectly consistent. The same forest, the same tree, the same 5 nooses. The only variation was their position within the dream. Sometimes they observed from the edge of the clearing. Other times they found themselves approaching the tree, drawn by an invisible force. Robert's journal, later recovered from his university office, revealed his increasing concern and his attempts to maintain scientific objectivity in the face of an inexplicable phenomenon. October 9th, 1977, third consecutive night of shared dream content among all family members. Basic imagery remains consistent. Forest clearing, twisted tree, 5 nooses, red moon. Positions and perspectives within the dream space vary. Timothy reports standing directly beneath the tree. Eleanor observes from the forest edge. Michael, Sarah, and I approach from different directions. The statistical probability of 5 individuals experiencing such similar dream content without external influence is virtually nil. Possible explanations: 1. Subconscious influence through conversational suggestion. 2. Environmental factor affecting sleep patterns. 3. Shared psychological response to the new environment. We'll begin checking the house for mold, gas leaks, or other potential neurotoxins tomorrow. October 11th, 1977. 5th night. Dream persistence continues. House inspection revealed no environmental toxins or safety hazards. Dream content is evolving in concerning ways. The whispers are becoming more distinct, though still intelligible. Eleanor reports hearing what sounds like her name being called. Michael describes a pulling sensation toward the central tree. Sarah's account includes shadows moving among the trees surrounding the clearing. Timothy drew a picture today, the tree with 5 stick figures approaching it. When asked about the figures, he identified them as our family. His matter-of-fact acceptance of this imagery is perhaps the most disturbing element. October 13th, 1977. 1 week of continuous shared dreaming. Professional objectivity is becoming difficult to maintain. The dream now includes sensory components beyond visual. Temperature drops, the scent of damp earth and decay, the texture of the tree bark. Eleanor awoke with a rope burn-like mark on her palm after dreaming of touching one of the nooses. The mark faded within hours. Rational explanations are increasingly inadequate. Considering consulting with Dr. Winters from the parapsychology department, though doing so risks my professional credibility. The family is showing signs of sleep deprivation, irritability, concentration issues, mild paranoia. Michael missed school today, claiming illness, though I suspect he simply needed rest. Found Sarah sleepwalking last night, standing at her bedroom window facing the forest behind our property. When guided back to bed, she whispered, "The tree is calling." Prescribed mild sedatives for everyone tonight. Will monitor effects. Robert's initial skepticism gave way to a growing desperation as the shared dreams continued. His scientific training demanded rational explanations, yet the consistency and evolution of their experiences defied all conventional understanding. He checked for environmental toxins, carbon monoxide, and mold. He considered mass suggestion, but the specific details reported by each family member were too precise and too consistent for such an explanation to suffice. As a sleep specialist, Robert knew that shared dreams were not unheard of, but for all 5 members of a family to experience virtually identical nightmares night after night with evolving narrative elements fell far outside established science. By the end of October, the shared nightmares had taken a visible toll.
Dark circles shadowed the family's eyes, and their once vibrant personalities had dulled. Eleanor's paintings grew increasingly disturbing, her canvases filled with twisted trees and crimson skies. The evolution of her art provided a visual record of the family's descent into the shared nightmare. Her early works, from their first weeks in Millfield, had captured the beauty of the Vermont autumn. But as the dreams persisted, her color palette darkened, her compositions became chaotic, and the twisted tree from their nightmares began to appear in every piece, sometimes as the central focus, sometimes lurking in the background, but always present, always watching. One painting, later titled The Waiting, showed the tree in stark silhouette against a blood-red sky, 5 nooses hanging from its branches. What made the piece truly unsettling, however, were the shadows cast by the nooses, not the shapes of empty ropes, but human silhouettes, suggesting bodies where none were depicted. When Robert questioned this detail, Eleanor seemed surprised. "I hadn't intended to create that effect," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "The brush sometimes knows things we don't." Michael's writing took a dark turn, filled with themes of inevitability and fate. His short stories, once varied in subject matter, now revolved around the same narrative. Characters drawn to places they didn't want to go, making choices they didn't want to make, all while knowing they couldn't resist. His English teacher, concerned by this thematic fixation and the increasingly nihilistic tone of his work, contacted Robert. "It's just a phase," Robert had assured her. Teenagers often explored dark themes in their creative work, but privately he wondered if his son's stories were more than typical adolescent angst, if they were his attempt to make sense of the inexplicable experience they were all sharing. In one story, titled The Calling, Michael wrote, "The tree doesn't need to chase you. It's patient. It knows that once it's chosen you, you'll come to it eventually. Free will is the greatest illusion. We think we're making choices, but we're just following a script written long before we were born, walking paths cleared for us by those who came before, heading toward destinations that had been waiting for us all along." Sarah stopped taking photographs altogether, claiming that shadows appeared in her developed pictures that hadn't been present when she took them. Her darkroom, once a sanctuary, now remained locked, her camera gathering dust on her dresser. When Robert finally convinced her
to show him the photographs, he had to admit there was something strange about them. Areas of darkness had form and intention, not the random light leaks or processing errors he had expected. In one image of the forest behind their property, a shape among the trees resembled the twisted oak from their dreams, though no such tree was visible in that location. In another, a family portrait taken in their living room, 5 noose-like shadow shapes hung from the ceiling behind them. They could have been dismissed as camera strap reflections, if not for their consistent appearance across multiple photographs. And young Timothy, once so full of energy, became withdrawn, spending hours drawing the same twisted tree over and over. His kindergarten teacher sent a note home expressing concern about his repeated drawings of people hanging from a tree and suggesting he may have been exposed to inappropriate media content. The childish renderings, with their stick figure simplicity, were somehow more disturbing than Eleanor's sophisticated paintings or Sarah's shadowed photographs. The horror of their shared nightmare filtered through innocent eyes and rendered in crayon. Desperate for a scientific explanation, Robert installed recording equipment in their bedrooms to monitor their sleep patterns. The technology of 1977 was primitive by today's standards. Bulky tape recorders, basic electroencephalograph or EEG machines borrowed from the university sleep lab, and Super 8 film cameras set to capture time-lapse footage. He spent hours reviewing the data, searching for patterns, correlations, anything that might explain what was happening. What he found defied conventional sleep science. The results were unprecedented. All 5 family members entered REM sleep simultaneously and remained synchronized throughout the night, a phenomenon that defied all established science. Normally, individuals cycle through sleep stages independently. For an entire family to enter and exit REM sleep in perfect synchronicity was, by all accounts, impossible. The Super 8 footage was equally disturbing. At certain moments, all 5 sleepers would sit upright in bed simultaneously, their eyes still closed, their lips moving in perfect unison, as if reciting the same unheard words. These episodes lasted for precisely 7 minutes each time, before they would lie down again, continuing their synchronized sleep cycles as if nothing had happened. Even more unsettling were the whispers captured on the audio recordings, unintelligible murmurs that didn't come from any of the sleepers. Robert had the university's audio technician analyze the recordings, hoping for a rational explanation, like radio interference or tape degradation. The technician found none. The whispers were real, present in the rooms, captured clearly on tape, yet seeming to originate from nowhere and everywhere at once. When amplified and slowed down, certain phrases began to emerge. "Come to us," "The tree waits," "5 for 5," "Complete the circle." These phrases corresponded directly with the content of their shared dreams. In his journal, Robert wrote, "The audio phenomena defy explanation. Source analysis inconclusive, not originating from any of the sleepers, yet present in all 5 rooms. Identical content across all recordings. Technical specialist confirms no cross-contamination between tapes, not radio interference or equipment malfunction. Whispers contain specific references to dream content not discussed outside the family. Scientific paradigm is insufficient to explain current observations. We are either experiencing a mass hallucination, including a secondary hallucination of the audio recordings, or confronting a phenomenon outside current scientific understanding." Concerned for his family's deteriorating mental state, Robert reached out to his colleague, Dr. Harriet Winters, a specialist in parapsychology. Dr. Winters suggested that the Bennetts might be experiencing what she called a consciousness convergence, a rare phenomenon where multiple individuals psychically connect during sleep, sharing a collective dreamscape. "But why this particular dream?" Robert asked during one of their meetings in early November. "Why the forest, the tree, the nooses?" Robert and Dr. Winters sat in her office, a space that reflected her position between two worlds. Bookshelves were lined with both scholarly journals and ancient tomes on dream interpretation and paranormal phenomena. A vintage Curlian photography setup occupied one corner, while academic awards hung beside framed photos of crop circles. Dr. Winters, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and a conservative tweed suit, wore a clear quartz crystal pendant and a ring set with a piece of moldavite. She was respected for her rigorous methodology, yet viewed with suspicion for her willingness to explore phenomena others dismissed. Dr. Winters chose her words carefully. "Dreams often speak in symbols, Robert. The forest represents the unknown. The tree signifies life and connection, and the nooses—" She paused. "They could symbolize choices, endings, or transitions." "5 nooses," Robert muttered, running his hair through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his exhaustion and growing desperation. "One for each of us. I'm a scientist, Harriet. I believe in empirical evidence and rational explanations, but what's happening to my family?" He trailed off, staring at the rain on the office window. "Sometimes our scientific paradigms are insufficient to explain certain phenomena," Dr. Winters said gently. "That doesn't mean we abandon the scientific method. It means we expand our understanding of what's possible. Radio waves were once considered supernatural, as was electricity. What we're dealing with may simply be an aspect of consciousness we haven't yet mapped." Robert nodded without conviction. "So what do we do? How do we stop these dreams?" Dr. Winters suggested that the house itself might be a factor. Old buildings, she explained, sometimes retained energies or impressions from past events, what some might call hauntings, though she preferred the term environmental memory imprints. She recommended he research the history of the property more thoroughly. Robert spent days in the Millfield Historical Society archives, piecing together the story of 47 Oakwood Lane. The small building, a converted Victorian-era home itself, smelled of aging paper and was filled with filing cabinets and display cases. Ms. Abernathy, the elderly archivist who had overseen the collection for 40 years, seemed surprised by his interest. "Not many ask about that house," she remarked, peering at him over her half-moon spectacles. "Though perhaps more should." Robert felt a chill run down his spine.
He requested property records, newspaper articles, and town meeting minutes.
The house had been built by Edmund Blackwood, a wealthy timber merchant with a cruel reputation. Black and white photographs showed a stern-faced man with a full beard and cold eyes, standing proudly before the newly constructed house with his wife and 3 children arranged beside him like possessions. Blackwood had made his fortune clear-cutting vast sections of the Vermont forest, selling the lumber to manufacturers across New England. He was known for his ruthless business practices, underpaying his workers and ignoring the primitive environmental regulations of the era. Local indigenous tribes had protested his destruction of what they considered sacred forest lands, but their concerns were dismissed by town officials eager for the economic benefits Blackwood's industry brought to Millfield. In 1889, just 2 years after the house was completed, Blackwood was accused by his business partner of stealing lumber from protected forest land. Letters to the editor in the Millfield Gazette revealed the town's divided response. On a cold November night, facing financial ruin and public shame, Blackwood led his wife and 3 children into the forest behind their property. None of them returned. A search party found their bodies the next morning hanging from a large oak tree in a clearing. The newspaper account, printed on the front page of the November 18, 1889 edition of the Millfield Gazette, was clinical in its description. The bodies of Edmund Blackwood, 43, his wife Constance, 38, and their children, Edward, 16, William, 14, and Mary, 7, were discovered suspended from the branches of a large oak tree approximately 1 mile into the forest behind the Blackwood estate. The official report ruled it a murder-suicide. But Robert found troubling inconsistencies. A statement from the doctor who examined the bodies noted that all 5 victims had walked barefoot through the forest, their feet cut and bloodied, which was unusual if Blackwood had forced them there. Even more disturbing was the doctor's observation that the bodies were arranged in a perfect circle around the tree's trunk, a deliberate, ritualistic configuration that would have been difficult for one man to achieve alone. The property changed hands numerous times, but few owners stayed for long. The house became associated with stories of strange sounds, unexplainable cold spots, and troubling dreams. The local newspaper archives contained several accounts of unusual occurrences. A maid in 1912 who claimed to have seen 5 figures in the upstairs hallway. A family in 1935 who abandoned the house in the middle of the night, leaving all their possessions behind. A child in 1953 who spoke of rope people in the forest who called his name. The real estate agent who sold the house to the Bennetts had conveniently omitted these details. As November progressed, the shared nightmares intensified. Now, the Bennetts not only saw the forest clearing, but felt compelled to approach the tree. In their dreams, they would reach for the nooses, their hands moving independent of their will. They would wake just before placing the ropes around their necks, gasping and drenched in cold sweat. Eleanor documented the progression in her journal, later found among her paintings. The dream is changing. Before, we were observers. Now, we're participants. Last night, I felt the rough hemp against my palms, the weight of the noose as I lifted it toward my neck. I could smell the fibers, feel the texture. And the voices? No longer whispers, but clear instructions. Join us. Complete the circle. What circle? What am I being asked to complete? And why does part of me want to obey? Robert's scientific journals gave way to desperate entries. Dream control techniques ineffective. REM's lucid dreaming methods fail. We recognize we're dreaming, but cannot alter the narrative or wake ourselves.
Pharmaceutical intervention, sedatives, REM suppressants, provides temporary relief but intensifies dreams when medication wears off. Family now reluctant to sleep. Timothy napped during school today and woke screaming about the tree people calling him. School nurse sent him home. Principal suggested family counseling. If only it were that simple. Michael's poetry became increasingly disturbing. 5 ropes sway in moonlit dark, 5 souls bound by unseen mark. The twisted oak with reaching limb calls us to its shadow grim. Not our will, but ancient debt pulls us to a fate well set. In dreams we walk the needle path to appease some ancient wrath. The circle breaks, the circle mends. Where one life stops, another ends. 5 for 5, the whispers call, until we hang, one and all. The family's physical symptoms worsened. All 5 began sleepwalking, often found standing in the upstairs hallway, staring toward the forest. Eleanor would wake to find herself at the back door with her hand on the knob, having no memory of leaving her bed. Michael was discovered on the forest's edge one morning, barefoot in the November frost. Sarah set up a camera with a tripwire at her bedroom door, only to find the film exposed, as if something had deliberately erased what had been captured. They reported hearing whispers even when they were awake. Objects would move inexplicably, doors would open and close on their own, and the temperature in certain rooms would dramatically drop. The family cat, an orange tabby named Rusty, refused to enter certain rooms and would hiss at empty corners. Timothy began to speak of the tree people, figures he saw in his room at night, their necks bent at odd angles and water dripping from their clothes. They want us to join their family, he told his alarmed parents. They say they've been waiting a long time for us to come home. Sarah developed a rash around her neck, a band of irritated skin that resembled a rope burn. The family doctor could find no medical cause. Michael began hearing the whispers even when his stereo was blaring Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. The voices seemed to weave themselves into the music. Eleanor found herself painting compulsively, unable to stop even when exhaustion made her hands shake. The paintings became increasingly detailed, filled not only with the tree and nooses, but also the strange symbols carved into its bark. When Robert asked about these symbols, Eleanor had no explanation. "I just know they have to be there," she admitted. Desperate to protect his family, Robert contacted Dr. Winters again. She agreed to conduct an overnight observation at the house, bringing specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature fluctuations, and audio anomalies. Dr. Winters arrived just before sunset on November 15, 1977. Her station wagon was packed with the cutting-edge paranormal research technology of the era. Thermographic cameras, EMF detectors, high-sensitivity microphones, portable EEG machines, and a 16mm film camera.
Night vision. She was accompanied by her graduate assistant, Thomas Chen. The house presented an imposing silhouette against the darkening sky, its bare branches clawing at the twilight. Dr. Winters later wrote in her field notes that she felt an immediate sense of unease, a heaviness in the air, a sensation of being watched. Eleanor greeted them at the door, her vibrant appearance diminished by exhaustion. The interior was dimly lit, shadows gathering in corners despite the numerous lamps. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor whispered. "Robert's upstairs with the children. Timothy had another episode at school today." Dr. Winters nodded sympathetically. As she and Thomas set up their equipment, Dr. Winters took baseline readings. Everything seemed normal, though the house was unnervingly quiet. The Bennetts gathered in the living room,
Robert in his armchair, Eleanor on the edge of the sofa, Michael in the window seat, Sarah curled up in a corner, and Timothy cross-legged on the floor drawing. Dr. Winters was struck by how they positioned themselves, maintaining maximum distance from each other, as if unconsciously establishing a perimeter. Dr. Winters explained the monitoring procedure. Each family member would wear a portable EEG headset. Motion sensors would be placed near their beds. Audio recorders and infrared cameras would capture any anomalous phenomena. The family would take their normal sedatives and retire to their bedrooms. "And if something happens?" Eleanor asked, her eyes darting toward the dark windows. "Thomas and I will be monitoring everything from the guest room," Dr. Winters assured her. "We'll intervene if necessary." All 5 Bennetts fell asleep at precisely 11:17 p.m. Their brainwave patterns, though they were in separate rooms, synchronized perfectly. At 3:33 a.m., the electromagnetic readings throughout the house spiked dramatically. The temperature dropped more than 15 degrees in a matter of seconds, and the audio recorders captured a chorus of whispers that, when later analyzed, seemed to repeat the same phrase, "Join us in the clearing." Most disturbing was the behavior of the sleepers. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all 5 Bennetts sat upright in their beds simultaneously. Their eyes were closed, but their lips moved in perfect unison, whispering words that matched those captured on the recorders. They remained in this state for precisely 7 minutes before lying down again, returning to normal sleep patterns. Dr. Winters and Thomas, watching the feeds from the guest room, were astonished. The temperature in their room plummeted, their breath visible in the frigid air. The equipment began to malfunction. Then, a shadow moved across the wall behind them, a humanoid shape that seemed to stretch upward, its neck at an impossible angle. Thomas saw it first, a strangled gasp escaping his throat. Dr. Winters turned just in time to see the figure fade into the corner, but not before glimpsing what appeared to be a noose around its stretched neck. The 16mm camera, which had been recording the monitoring station, captured only a dark blur. The audio recorder, however, picked up a distinct sound immediately after the shadow's appearance, a creaking, like rope stretched taut under weight, followed by a whispered, "Soon." Shaken, Dr. Winters recommended the Bennetts leave the house immediately. "Whatever's happening here goes beyond conventional science," she told Robert the next morning. "I believe your family is in danger." The morning after the observation, Dr. Winters and the Bennetts gathered around the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, a stark contrast to the events of the night. Dr. Winters spread photographs, EEG printouts, and thermographic images across the table, evidence of the unprecedented phenomena. Infrared images showed cold spots in the shapes of human figures standing in the hallway. Audio spectrograms displayed voice patterns in empty rooms. The EEG readings demonstrated the impossible synchronization of 5 minds. "In my 30 years of investigating paranormal phenomena, I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Winters said, her voice steady despite her obvious concern. "The activity is escalating, and the pattern suggests it's building towards some kind of climax." "What kind of climax?" Eleanor asked, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold. "Based on the dream content and the historical events associated with this property, I'm concerned about a potential reenactment scenario." "You think we're going to hang ourselves?" Michael said bluntly, his directness exposing the fear they had all been avoiding. "I think something wants you to," Dr. Winters corrected. "Something is influencing your consciousness during sleep, creating a shared dreamscape that's pushing you towards a specific outcome." Robert, whose career was built on rational explanations, found himself facing something he couldn't explain. He agreed they would stay with friends while they looked for a new home. But when he shared this decision, he met with unexpected resistance.
"We can't leave," Eleanor said, her voice distant and her gaze fixed on the forest. "It wouldn't let us." "The tree is waiting," Michael added. "It knows our names," Sarah whispered. "The whispers say we belong to them now," Timothy said, his childish voice chillingly matter-of-fact. Their responses came in rapid succession, as if reciting lines from a script they weren't consciously aware of knowing. Their voices were flat and emotionless, and all 5 pairs of eyes were fixed on the forest behind the property. Dr. Winters felt a chill run down her spine. The family seemed to be in a shared trance. "Robert," she said sharply, trying to break their hold, "look at me." Slowly, with visible effort, he turned from the window. His eyes struggled to focus, as if looking at her through a thick fog. "This is what I'm talking about," Dr. Winters said. "Whatever is happening here is affecting your family's autonomy, your ability to make independent decisions. That alone is reason enough to leave immediately." Robert agreed, seeming to come back to himself. "You're right. We need to pack some things. Just essentials. We can stay at a hotel tonight." Alarmed by their resistance, Robert contacted Dr. Winters again, who suggested a more drastic approach. Temporary sedation to break the cycle of shared dreams, followed by immediate relocation. Robert agreed, and that evening, under Dr. Winters' supervision, the family took sedatives that would suppress REM sleep, theoretically preventing the nightmares.
The plan seemed to work. The Bennetts slept dreamlessly. In the morning, they appeared more like their former selves. The strange resistance to leaving had vanished, replaced by an eager
agreement to move as soon as possible. They packed essentials, preparing to stay with Dr. Winters until they found a new home. The transformation was remarkable. Eleanor hummed as she folded clothes, a bright scarf tied in her hair. Michael helped his younger siblings sort their belongings. Robert moved with purpose. Even Timothy seemed lighter, his laughter echoing through the house for the first time in weeks. Dr. Winters felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps the sedatives had broken the psychic connection. Perhaps removing them from the property would sever the influence completely. She helped pack the car, keeping a watchful eye on the forest edge, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. By mid-afternoon, the station wagon was loaded. Suddenly, a storm arose. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, and thunder rolled across the mountains. Rain poured down in sheets, making visibility nearly impossible. Dr. Winters suggested postponing their departure, a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The storm appeared with startling suddenness. The clear, cold November sky turned slate gray in minutes. Clouds boiled overhead, seemingly forming directly above the property. The wind howled, bending the trees like supplicants bowing before an invisible force. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns that reminded Dr. Winters of the symbols in Eleanor's paintings. The thunder that followed seemed to contain unnatural patterns, like rhythmic drum beats or the creaking of taut rope. "We should wait it out," Dr. Winters said over the storm's fury. "Driving in this would be dangerous." Robert nodded reluctantly. They retreated into the house, the family gathering in the living room while Dr. Winters made phone calls from the kitchen. Through the window, she watched the storm rage, noting how the rain seemed to fall in a perfect circle around the property, heaviest over the house itself. By evening, the rain showed no signs of abating. The Bennetts grew increasingly anxious. Timothy began to cry, saying the tree people would be waiting for him in his dreams. Sarah developed a headache. Michael paced the living room. "Perhaps we should try to leave anyway," Robert suggested. But when Dr. Winters tried to start her car, the engine wouldn't turn over. The headlights flickered and died. The radio produced only static. "It's the house," Eleanor said. "It knows we're trying to leave. It won't let us go until it gets what it wants." That night, despite taking sedatives again, the Bennetts experienced their most vivid nightmare yet. They stood at the edge of the forest clearing. The twisted tree at the center seemed larger, its branches reaching toward them. The 5 nooses swayed violently in a wind that carried not whispers, but clear, commanding voices. "Join us, complete the circle, fulfill your purpose." For the first time, they saw figures hanging from 4 of the nooses. A man, a woman, a teenage boy, and a girl. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but their clothing was unmistakably from the late 1800s. The 5th noose hung empty, waiting. The figures swayed with deliberate, beckoning movements. Water dripped from their clothing, creating patterns in the earth, symbols similar to those carved into the tree's trunk. Their voices came through with perfect clarity. "Join us," they called in unison. "The circle is incomplete. The 5th must come." The dream had a tactile quality beyond any they had experienced before. The cold air, the scent of wet earth and decay, the taste of metallic fear. There was a new sensation, a pulling not just toward the tree, but upward, as if gravity were reversing, drawing them toward the empty noose. Dr. Winters, sleeping in the guest room, was awakened at 3:33 a.m. by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She found all 5 Bennetts walking in single file down the stairs, their movements synchronized, their eyes open but unseeing. She called their names, tried to block their path, even attempted to physically restrain Robert, but they moved with unnatural strength, pushing past her as if she were smoke. "Robert, wake up!" she cried. But his eyes, though open, saw nothing in the physical world. His skin was cold, his movements mechanical, yet fluid like a marionette. They moved with singular purpose toward the back door and into the storm. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still obscured the moon and stars. The only light came from distant lightning. The ground was saturated, mud pulling at their feet as they walked in an unwavering straight line toward the tree line. Dr. Winters followed, pleading for them to wake up, but they moved steadily forward. At the edge of the forest, she stopped. A primal fear prevented her from following further. She ran back to the house to call for help, but the phone lines were dead and her car wouldn't start. It wasn't until dawn that the storm subsided. Dr. Winters walked into town for help, a 5-mile journey that took her 2 hours on foot. By the time she reached the Millfield police station, the sun had risen, revealing a sky washed clean of clouds. Sheriff James Holden was skeptical. "So you're saying the whole family just walked into the forest in the middle of the night?" he asked, making notes. "And you didn't follow them because you were scared?" "I was afraid," Dr. Winters corrected, "but it was more than that. There was something wrong about the forest, something that didn't want me to follow." Sheriff Holden exchanged glances with his deputy, but professionally he took her concern seriously. "We'll send a search party," he said. Dr. Winters led the search party back to the property and into the forest, following what she believed to be the family's path. The forest looked different in daylight, less menacing, but somehow more secretive. "The family was having problems before last night," the sheriff said as they walked. "We had reports from the school about the kids. The little one was talking about people hanging from trees." "It wasn't abuse," she said firmly. "It was the house." After an hour, a deputy radioed the sheriff. "Sheriff, you might want to see this. About a mile northeast of your position, there's some kind of clearing that's not on any of our maps." They found a clearing that hadn't appeared on any maps of the area. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled. But there were no bodies, no nooses. The clearing was a perfect circle, about 50 feet in diameter. The tree itself was unlike any oak Dr. Winters had ever seen. Its trunk spiraled unnaturally, and its bark was covered in symbols that matched Eleanor's paintings and Timothy's drawings. Most disturbing was the ground beneath the tree. Despite the heavy rainfall, the earth in the clearing was dry, almost dusty. In the dry earth were footprints, 2 adult sets and 3 smaller sets, all leading to the base of the tree, and none leading away. "They were here," Dr. Winters said, kneeling to examine the footprints. "These match the family's shoe sizes, but where did they go?" Sheriff Holden circled the tree. No signs of climbing, no disturbed earth to suggest digging. He looked up at the branches. No evidence of hanging either. They wouldn't have had rope, Dr. Winters said. They left the house
Nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Then where are they? The sheriff demanded. 5 people don't just vanish into thin air. But they had. Despite an exhaustive search, no trace of the Bennett family was ever found beyond those footprints. The search continued for weeks, involving local volunteers, state police, and even FBI agents. But the Bennetts had vanished without a trace. Haunted by her failure, Dr. Winters dedicated the remainder of her career to the case. She compiled all the evidence: Robert's journals, Eleanor's paintings, Michael's writings, Sarah's photographs, Timothy's drawings, the audio recordings, the data from her observation, and the historical records of the property. The Bennett case became her obsession. She took a sabbatical from teaching to focus exclusively on understanding what had happened. The walls of her office became a visual representation of her investigation. Maps of the forest with the clearing marked in red, timelines of the family's experiences, and family photographs connected with red string to images of the Blackwood family. She interviewed everyone who had known the Bennetts in Millfield. One local indigenous elder, a man named Joseph White Eagle, told her, "That part of the forest was sacred to my people. We called it the place between, a threshold where the veil between worlds grows thin. The white man Blackwood cut trees from that place despite our warnings. Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed." Dr. Winters' research led her to other historical cases of groups experiencing shared visions before their unexplained disappearances. In Ireland, a family of 6 vanished in 1902 after reporting dreams of an ancient stone circle calling to them. In Japan, 3 generations of a family disappeared in 1943 after describing visions of ancestral spirits beckoning from the forest. In the Appalachian Mountains, a preacher and his 4 followers vanished in 1965 after claiming to have been visited in dreams by messengers telling them their true home lay elsewhere. The patterns were striking. Families or groups experiencing shared visions or dreams, often involving deceased ancestors or historical figures connected to the location, culminating in their disappearance in what are considered liminal spaces. Dr. Winters presented her findings at parapsychological conferences and published papers, eventually compiling her research into a book titled Collective Consciousness and Liminal Spaces, The Bennett Case and Beyond. The academic community largely dismissed her work as pseudoscience, but among those who studied paranormal phenomena, her research was regarded as groundbreaking. Meanwhile, the house at 47 Oakwood Lane stood empty once again. The Bennett's relatives were granted the right to clear out their belongings. In 1983, a development company purchased the property. The old Victorian house was demolished to make way for a modern subdivision. During excavation, workers discovered a sealed metal box beneath the foundation, containing a journal dated 1889, belonging to Edmund Blackwood. The journal had been carefully wrapped in oilcloth, preserving it for nearly a century. The construction foreman, unsure what to do, contacted the Millfield Historical Society, who in turn notified Dr. Winters. The journal's early entries described Blackwood's business ambitions and his pride in the grand house he had built, but as the entries progressed, the tone changed. He began writing about dreams of a forest clearing he couldn't find on any of his survey maps, dreams of a twisted oak that spoke to him in the voices of ancient beings. The journal painted a different picture than the historical record. According to Blackwood's writings, he had discovered something ancient in the forest, a clearing with a twisted oak that hadn't appeared on any of his survey maps. The tree, he wrote, spoke to him in dreams, showing him visions of past and future. It demanded sacrifice, 5 souls to replace those who had been freed from its grasp. May 12, 1889. Found the clearing today. It was not there yesterday. Of this I am certain. We have surveyed every acre of this forest, and I know it as well as I know my own house. Yet there it was, a perfect circle with the twisted oak at its center.
The oak is unlike any I have seen, its trunk spiraling as if it grew by turning upon itself. William suggested cutting it down, but I forbade it. Something about the tree repels the axe. Jenkins tried nonetheless and claimed the blade bounced off the bark as if striking stone. I believe him, though I did not witness the attempt myself. I find I do not wish to see the tree harmed. The dreams began last night. I stood in the clearing beneath the twisted oak, and it spoke to me, not with words, but with images, visions flooding my mind. I saw people from times long past and times yet to come, all drawn to the tree, all serving some purpose I cannot yet comprehend. When I woke, I found mud on my feet, though I have no memory of leaving my bed. Constance noticed, but said nothing. There is worry in her eyes. June 3rd, 1889. Constance had the dream last night. She described the clearing, the tree, the sense of being called. The children, too. Edward mentioned it at breakfast, and William admitted he had experienced the same. Even little Mary spoke of the talking tree that visits her in sleep. We are all dreaming the same dream. What does it mean? What does it want from us?
The entries grew more disturbed. Blackwood described the dreams intensifying. The tree, he wrote, was a gateway, a passage between worlds. It showed him visions of previous caretakers, 5 souls bound to the tree, maintaining its existence in the world by their sacrifice until they could be replaced by another 5, allowing their release. October 8, 1889. The tree has shown me its purpose. It needs new caretakers, 5 souls to anchor it to this realm. The current caretakers have served for centuries and yearn for release. They can only be freed when another 5 take their places. It wants us, me, Constance, the children. We are the perfect 5. We are somehow connected to this place, though I know not how. Perhaps in some past life, perhaps in some future one. Time means nothing to the tree. It exists in all moments simultaneously. Blackwood described fighting the tree's influence, but in the end, he failed. His final entry, dated November 17, 1889, read, "It is won. We go tonight to the clearing. God forgive me, for I can no longer resist its commands. Perhaps those who come after will be stronger." The official record stated Blackwood had murdered his family, but his journal suggested a more complex cycle of influence and sacrifice. Most disturbing was his description of the dreams that had plagued his family in the weeks before their disappearance. Dreams of a forest clearing, a twisted tree, and 5 empty nooses. Dr. Winters obtained the journal and added it to her collection of evidence. The parallels between the Blackwood and Bennett cases were undeniable, but there was one crucial difference. The Blackwoods' bodies had been found hanging from the tree, but no trace of the Bennetts was ever discovered. This discrepancy troubled Dr. Winters. Had the Blackwoods truly died, or had they been absorbed by the tree, becoming the very entities that later called to the Bennett family? The discovery of the journal reignited interest in the case, but strange occurrences began to plague those investigating it. A true crime writer reported dreams of the clearing and the tree, eventually abandoning the project after waking with inexplicable rope burns around his neck. A graduate student transcribing Blackwood's journal developed a mysterious rash and began sleepwalking toward the forest. Dr. Winters herself began to have nightmares about the clearing. She saw 9 figures, 4 hanging from the tree, the Blackwood family, and 5 more approaching, the Bennetts. But there was a 10th figure, herself, watching from a distance. "The tree knows I witnessed its taking of the Bennetts," she wrote in her private notes. "It recognizes me as a potential threat, or perhaps as a potential messenger. It wants me to tell their story, but not to prevent its continuation. The question that haunts me is, why 5? What significance does this number hold for the entity in the clearing? And if the cycle continues, who will be the next family of 5 called to the Twisted Oak? In 1992, 15 years after the Bennett's disappearance, a group of hikers reported a strange experience while camping near the former Bennett property. They described waking simultaneously in the middle of the night, drawn to a clearing they hadn't noticed during the day. In the center stood a massive oak tree, and hanging from its branches were 5 nooses, 4 occupied by indistinct figures, and 1 empty, swaying in a windless night. The hikers, 3 college students, had no knowledge of the Bennett case or the Blackwood family history. They fled and reported their experience to local authorities. The search team found no clearing and no tree. The incident was dismissed as a shared hallucination.
But Dr. Winters saw it differently. The hiker's account aligned too perfectly with the shared dreams of the Bennetts. She theorized that they had witnessed a momentary thinning of the veil between worlds. She interviewed the hikers, recording their accounts and comparing them with Robert's dream descriptions. The similarities were striking, but there was a new detail. The hikers saw only 4 occupied nooses, not 5. They saw the Blackwood family, Dr. Winters wrote in her notes. 4 figures, Edmund, Constance, and 2 of their children. But where was the 5th Blackwood, young Mary? And why were there no signs of the Bennett family? The empty noose suggests a space waiting to be filled. But waiting for whom? In her final paper, published just before her retirement in 1998, Dr. Winters proposed a controversial theory. What if the Blackwood family hadn't actually died in 1889? What if they had been absorbed by the tree, becoming part of its consciousness? And what if the tree, through dreams and whispers, had called the Bennett family to replace them, to take their places in the nooses, allowing the Blackwoods to finally rest? Consider the possibility, she wrote, that what we perceive as death may in certain circumstances be transformation. She suggested the tree was a nexus point, a place where consciousness could transfer between states of being. The Blackwood family, by joining with the tree, became its anchors, and after nearly a century, they sought release. The tree, needing new anchors, called to the Bennetts, another group of 5, with the specific psychic resonance it required. This would explain why no trace of the Bennetts was ever found, and why the hikers had seen only 4 occupied nooses. Dr. Winters' theory was met with skepticism, but those familiar with the case found it disturbingly plausible. The subdivision built on the former Bennett property never thrived. Houses remained unsold or were quickly abandoned by owners who complained of troubling dreams. Eventually, the development was abandoned altogether. The half-built houses were reclaimed by nature, and the forest slowly expanded back over the land. County officials designated the area a protected woodland, preventing any further development. Local residents knew to avoid that particular section of forest, especially at night, especially in November. In 2002, 25 years after the Bennett's disappearance, a local newspaper journalist, intrigued by Dr. Winters' theories, ventured into the forest to search for the clearing. He never returned. His camera was found 3 days later at the edge of the forest, containing a single photograph, a blurry image of a large tree in a clearing with dark shapes hanging from its branches. The Bennett case remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in the study of collective consciousness. What happened to Robert, Eleanor, Michael, Sarah, and Timothy on that stormy November night in 1977? Were they victims of a phenomenon beyond human understanding, or is there a more mundane explanation still waiting to be discovered? Some locals claim that on certain nights, particularly in November, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, they can hear whispers coming from the forest. 5 voices, they say, calling out names they don't recognize. As for Dr. Harriet Winters, she passed away in 2008, still haunted by her inability to save the family. In her personal papers, a sealed envelope was discovered labeled "For When They Returned."
Inside was a detailed account of everything she had witnessed and a warning. The tree hungers. It will call again. Listen not to the whispers from the forest. The envelope also contained a sketch drawn by Dr. Winters herself, a clearing, a twisted oak, and 5 nooses. 4 were occupied by shadowy figures. The 5th remained empty, waiting. Some mysteries resist resolution. Some stories have no ending, only a pause before the next cycle begins. The Bennett family walked into the forest on November night in 1977, led by dreams they all shared. Whether they found peace or horror, freedom or eternal imprisonment remains unknown. But somewhere in the forests of northern Vermont, if local stories are to be believed, there stands a clearing that doesn't appear on any map. And in that clearing, a twisted oak grows with branches that reach like supplicating arms toward the sky. And from those branches hang 5 nooses, sometimes empty, sometimes not, depending on who's dreaming and when. The Bennett case may never be solved, at least not in a way that satisfies our need for concrete answers. But it serves as a reminder of how little we truly understand about consciousness, about dreams, about the thin boundaries between what we call reality and what lies beyond. The most disturbing aspect of the Bennett case isn't what we know, but what we don't. It's the possibility that their fate wasn't an ending, but a transformation. It's the idea that somewhere, in some form, the Bennett family still exists, caught between worlds, between waking and dreaming, waiting for someone to take their places so they can finally wake up. Listen carefully. On autumn nights, when the wind moves through the trees, some say you can hear them, 5 voices calling from the forest, sharing one dream, one message, one warning. Don't follow the whispers. Don't enter the clearing. Don't look up at the twisted oak, or you too might find yourself caught in the dream that never ends. And so the file is closed. But tell me, would you dare to uncover the rest?